Let's dive right into the news, and we begin this morning in Washington, where a deal has finally been made over the debt ceiling.
We've got good news. Just spoke with Speaker McCarthy, and we've reached a bipartisan budget agreement that we're ready to move to the full Congress. It takes the threat of catastrophic default off the table, protects our hard-earned and historic economic recovery, and the agreement also represents a compromise, which means no one got everything they want. But that's the responsibility of governing.
We know at any time when you sit and negotiate within two parties that you got to work with both sides of the aisle. So it's not 100% what everybody wants, but when you look, the country is going to be stronger. This is going to be transformational, where our Congress is literally going to vote to spend less money this year than we spent last year.
The House will likely vote on the bill Wednesday, and then the Senate should take it up shortly after. If passed, the United States should be able to avoid default. The agreement, as is, would raise the debt ceiling until 2025, which means the government should be able to pay its bills until after the next election. Under the agreement, domestic programs will see an inflation-adjusted reduction, but those cuts would be mitigated by redirecting funding from the IRS and other areas that House Republicans wanted to claw back. The deal features new work requirements for some federal aid programs, including food stamps and family welfare benefits. If passed, the bill would rescind billions in unspent COVID relief funds. However, it would keep in place President Biden's student debt relief program as the Supreme Court continues to deliberate over its fate. In light of the agreement, both House Speaker McCarthy and President Biden are claiming the bill gives major wins for their respective parties, with the GOP saying the deal brings down spending, and Democrats are suggesting it protects gains made over the past 2 years. Meanwhile, the deal to raise the debt ceiling is facing some criticism from both sides of the aisle. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, the head of the House Progressive Caucus, signaled yesterday that some Democrats simply won't support the agreement.
Democrats watching right now at the White House, your friend Hakeem Jeffries, others, do they still have to worry about the Progressive Caucus and whether or not your caucus will support? Yes, they do. Okay, Congresswoman Jayapal, thank you so much.
Yes, they have to worry. Yes.
Yeah, they have to worry. Okay.
And on the Republican side, GOP Congressman Chip Roy, a member of the House Freedom Caucus, offered his own colorful criticism of the bill and vowed to try to stop it from passing. Despite the objections from some of these Freedom Caucus members, Speaker McCarthy says the majority of Republicans are on board.
We did a conference call with our conference, and over 95% were overwhelmingly excited about what they see. Members will react to whatever rumor you guys are writing about. Let's let the members actually read the bill before they make a decision to go forward.
Joining us now, co-author of the Washington Post's Early 202 newsletter, Leanne Caldwell, congressional reporter for the New York Times, Luke Broadwater, and chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Leanne, let's start with you. Just walk us through the last 48, 72 hours as to how we got here. How did this agreement finally get nailed down between the president and the House Speaker?
So there was obviously these negotiations that were going on for really intense negotiations for more than a week. It was hit or miss for a long time. But then the White House team of Shalanda Young, the OMB director, Steve Ricchetti, who's a top White House advisor, and Louisa Terrell were talking with Patrick McHenry, a Republican from North Carolina, and Garrett Graves, a congressman from Louisiana. And, you know, with the way that this deal finally came together is that they realized how they could find 218 votes. They had to go through every single issue and try to come up with the best possible scenario and combination of policies that they think could pass the House of Representatives. And that's ultimately the key here. Now, what they did not do is they did not go back and forth between their members during these negotiations and back to the negotiating table. They were negotiating based on what they thought their members would be able to support. And now what they have to do is they have to sell this this plan, this deal, this legislation to their members. And that is what has been going on, especially on the Republican side for the past 24 hours.
So, Luke, let's dive into that a little further. The whip operation here from both parties. Where do things stand? The two sides, at least publicly, yesterday suggested that they feel confident that they'll get the votes needed. But we know that there's some holdouts and some real resistance both sides of the aisle. Tell us where we are, and are they going to get the magic number?
Yeah, I mean, you can see how this deal could fall apart, right? If the House Freedom Caucus has already essentially declared war on the deal, so that's 35 no votes right there. If they could convince more and more Republicans to see things their way and join with them, and Kevin McCarthy loses that majority of the majority that he wants, and then the Progressive Caucus on the left revolts against the deal, that could kill it. That said, as of right now, Kevin McCarthy is shoring up support from the center. You saw that the New Democrats came out in favor of the deal yesterday. That's 100 votes right there for it. And you're seeing a lot of statements from centrists and establishment Republicans in favor of the deal. So it does look right now that Kevin McCarthy does have momentum in getting the votes he needs. Remember, he doesn't need every Republican. He just needs a majority of them, and then they need a majority of the Democrats to stand with it as well. And the Democrats are doing a fair amount of whipping as well, certainly the White House is, and it does seem like they're getting more and more support among Democrats for this compromise.
So, Peter Baker, let's talk about the White House's approach here, and from President Biden, one who has made no secret that he believes the key to politics is working across the aisle, try to find a bipartisan agreement. Frankly, this has been a number of times he's been willing to anger some of the forces on the left, believing that at the end of the day they'll be with him, or at least they've got no alternative to go elsewhere. So give us the latest from the West Wing as to how they view how this deal came together and what the reaction will be.
Yeah, of course, what President Biden wants to do is present himself as the one person who can still make bipartisanship work in a partisan era. And, of course, he has a record to talk about already in terms of the infrastructure bill and the semiconductor industry bill, the toxic burn pit bill. And now he's going to be able to take this to the country and say, see, we can still make government work. I can work across the aisle even if I don't get everything I want and they don't get everything they want. That's not an argument that rings satisfying to a lot of the Democrats, as Leanna and Luke were just talking about. The House Democrats have a different imperative. Their imperative is to win back the House. And in some ways, to them, sharpening the differences rather than coming together is the way to do that. So they have kind of a different starting point when they look at these negotiations. But the President of the United States, of course, is responsible for the country not going into default as best he can do it. And he was willing to make some concessions in order to get that, even though he said he wasn't going to negotiate over the debt ceiling. That's exactly what it did, of course. He didn't get any new Democratic priorities in there, but he did a lot to shave down what the Republicans have started with. He protected, essentially, the gains of the last 2 years when Democrats were in charge in terms of his climate priorities, in terms of his student loan forgiveness, in terms of the larger spending increases that had happened over those 2 years. Basically, those are now baked into the firmament in a way that he feels puts them beyond challenge, assuming they can get it through the House and the Senate.
So, Luke, the White House was betting early in the process that Speaker McCarthy, who, of course, took him 15 votes even to become Speaker, that he wouldn't be able to control his caucus conference to this point, that he would lose control and that would give them the advantage in negotiations. So far, he's held them together. So just talk to us about where Kevin McCarthy stands right now in terms of whether he has consolidated his grip on power in the House, or do we think that these Freedom Caucus members could still active sabotage here and blow up not just the deal, but potentially his speakership?
Well, Speaker McCarthy has begun referring to himself as sort of the underestimated man in Washington. And almost every press conference, he reminds us that he's constantly underestimated, and that he did overcome the 15 votes to become Speaker, and that he did unify the conference to pass certain bills through the House that many thought could not be passed. So he has done the job of rallying many Republicans to his side. But this is his biggest test to date. You're seeing a ton of angst from the Freedom Caucus right now. I mean, people are posting vomit emojis on Twitter and that sort of thing in response to this deal. But, Matt Gaetz, who was Kevin McCarthy's biggest critic, I think, in the House, said last night that he did not think the votes were there to oust Kevin McCarthy from the speakership. There is this threat hanging over Kevin McCarthy's head of the motion to vacate that anyone can call at any time. But Gaetz said last night he did not think the votes were there to force him out.
When Madison and Jefferson designed this democracy, good thing they took into account the vomit emojis possibility. This, of course, is all happening under the backdrop, under the shadow of 2024. And